Patrick Henry gave the following speech to the Second Virginia Convention on March 23, 1775, at St. John's Church in Richmond, Virginia. The question before the House is one of awful moment to this country. For my part, I consider it as nothing less than a question of freedom or slavery. Should I keep back my opinions at such a time, through fear of giving offense? I should consider myself as guilty of treason towards my country. Mr. President, it is natural to man to indulge in the illusions of hope. But is this the part of wise men engaged in a great struggle for liberty? Are we disposed to be of the number of those who, having eyes, see not, and having ears, hear not, the things which so nearly concern their salvation? For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it may cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst, and to provide for it. I know of no way of judging of the future, but by the past. And judging by the past, I wish to know what there has been in the conduct of the British ministry for the last 10 years to justify those hopes for which gentlemen have been pleased to comfort themselves and the House. Is it that insidious smile with which our petition has been lately received? Trust it not, sir. Suffer not yourselves to be betrayed with a kiss. Ask yourselves, are fleets and armies necessary to a work of love and reconciliation? Let us not deceive ourselves, sirs. These are the implements of war and subjugation, the last arguments to which kings resort. I ask, gentlemen, sir, has Great Britain an enemy in this quarter of the world to call for all this accumulation of navies and armies? No, sir, she has none. They are meant for us. They can be meant for no other. And what have we to oppose to them? Shall we try argument? Sir, we have been trying that for the last 10 years. Sir, we have done everything that could be done to avert the storm which is now coming on. We have petitioned, we have remonstrated, we have supplicated, we have prostrated ourselves before the throne, and have implored its interposition to arrest the tyrannical hands of Parliament. Our petitions have been slighted. Our remonstrances have produced additional violence and insult. Our supplications have been disregarded, and we have been spurned with contempt from the foot of the throne. In vain, after these things, we may indulge the fond hope of peace and reconciliation. There is no longer any room for hope. If we wish to be free, we must fight. I repeat it, sir. We must fight and appeal to arms and to the God of hosts. That is all is left us. It is in vain, sir, to extenuate the matter. The war is actually begun. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. The King's Hall podcast exists to make self-ruled men who rule well and win the world. And many times in the history of humanity, we have come to battles that we did not want to fight, that we wish that our fathers or their fathers had fought when the battle was small and winnable. Many times men have abdicated their problems to their sons. Brothers, this time is no different. We have come to a battle that looks impossible to win. We have few resources and fewer men. But because of the neglect and the intentional dismantling of Christendom, we have been pushed into a corner, and the fight has come to us. American Christianity, by and large, has abandoned its weapons and have fled the battlefield like cowards. The Word of God is not found in their churches, and the works of our forefathers in the faith have gone disregarded. Instead, we are left with the types of leaders in the church that Jude warns us of. Jude says, "For certain men have crept in unnoticed, who long ago were marked out for this condemnation, ungodly men, who turn the grace of our God into lewdness and deny the only Lord God and our Lord Jesus Christ. These are spots in your love feasts. While they feast with you without fear, serving only themselves, they are clouds without water, carried about by winds, late autumn trees without fruit, twice dead, pulled up by the roots, raging waves of the sea, foaming up of their own shame, wandering stars for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. These men have led many astray and have dismantled Christendom brick by brick by allowing the world to loot her. In this episode, we'll be laying out the final principles of building the new Christendom that we discussed in Season 1. We will be discussing the battle map and what needs to be done in this battle. As Patrick Henry says, the war is actually begun. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? Is life so dear, or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. The world continues to make its advance. Some fight, and many open the doors of their churches. The question for today is what is the battle, and how do we fight? And so, joining me today is Eric Kahn. Yes.
That Patrick Henry, man, I was getting fired up.
Yeah, me too.
I didn't know what to do. Like, maybe I should stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance or something.
No, actually don't do that.
That's actually bad.
You could sing the Star Spangled Banner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking of Jim Croce's Big Jim Brown. Like, you don't mess with him. You don't mess with Patrick Henry.
No, I don't think I'd mess with him.
No.
And I'm also joined by Brian Sauvé.
Gentlemen, it's a pleasure. It's been a pleasure here in Season 1 of the King's Hall.
How many episodes have we done?
Somewhere between a billion, trillion, million, and 10
it feels like
billion,
a lot of
million,
them.
Trillion.
Billions and billions and billions and billions.
Yeah.
Feels like a lot of them. So this is the season finale. Yep. Yeah, over 30. And so kind of to give a roadmap of where we're going today, we're going to give a review of where we've been. Mm-hmm. Where have things gone wrong in Christianity? And thus why, what's wrong now? Those problems are usually somewhat related. Where have things gone wrong? What is the state of the church now? And then what is our proposed plan of action? What is the battle? Where is the battle? How do we fight it? And so that's where we're going today. Final principles for Season 1. I guess just tackling the first question. In the first season, we addressed some of the issues with the church, where it had gone wrong in Christendom 1.0. And when I say Christendom 1.0, I mean like all the way up to where we are now. The death of Christendom 1.0 slowly, even in the 18th, 19th centuries. So where did things go wrong with Christendom 1.0 in review?
Man, that is a large question. But I guess I'll start. One of the big things that we talked about was Big, Fast, and Famous.
Yeah.
Which is really a 20th century thing, mid-20th century. But certainly early 20th century, there was this fixation and fascination with celebrity status. We've seen that only compound and grow. And so we've seen megachurches thrive. We've seen people like Rick Warren, Bill Hybels, Willow Creek, Saddleback Church was Rick Warren. But a lot of that movement just exploded. And so, basically Walmart became a church building, and they looked basically indistinguishable as well. I think that was actually one of the early things that we touched on that seemed to resonate a ton. Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that really resonated a ton because I would say the majority of us just grew up with that. That was the air we breathed. And
if you really think about Christendom, 1.0, even in the heyday, you had bishops and the whole Roman Catholic structure where you'd have popes living licentious lives of fame, essentially. There was, as I was teaching church history, there was one pope in particular. He had two men that he hired to shovel money to make sure that there was enough space in the treasury vault so that they could keep bringing in more money.
Well, that's probably just good practice.
I mean,
wow.
It's money management is what you call it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, this is just a human tendency, right? Is to want to be famous, to want to grow big and fast. And so it's not anything unique to just like, it was 20th century Christianity.
Yeah, I think what's unique about it now is that mass and telecommunications have allowed people's platforms to grow so much bigger. So because Rick Warren can access so many different people now, you couldn't have Rick Warren without Suburbia plus telecom.
Rick Warren has personally converted over 17 billion people.
And planted 100 trillion churches.
In several galaxies.
Yes.
Yes. I think one of the issues related to this kind of big, fast, and famous revivalism kind of thing. Also, we have to say that one of the themes I think that's run through some of these episodes, diagnosing the problem, is like a manufactured rootlessness, where we've had significant cultural disruption through the generations, and not just in the church, but everywhere.
Yeah, all the culture.
Just massive disruption in the normal succession from father to son, mother to daughter, in families, and the Industrial Revolution. A lot of these kind of factors come together to where we have a real cultural issue that isn't just religious or spiritual or within the church, but that the church handled in many ways by kind of baptizing rootlessness, baptizing a culture that didn't honor mother and father, that didn't honor the theological tradition that we were coming from, but kind of moved ancient barriers flippantly, quickly, without pause, in some of it in service of that big, fast, and famous, like, let's get rid of all this old stuffy stuff so that we can make church more palatable and appealing to people just in general, to come make them more comfortable and make it easier and easier and easier, lowest common denominator. Really, I think that goes into this conversation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you see is with the, I guess, the secularizing of the liturgy, you are accepting worldly standards into your church service to make it more palatable for worldly people. And so that's a theme that's also run throughout church history, is that you have the church slowly ceding ground to the world, to the state, whomever it may be, and essentially just abdicating large chunks of their responsibility to other spheres of authority that eat it up. And so, yeah, whether it's the liturgy, whether it's, hospitals or education or, many of these things, they've just slowly been relegated to the point where the church was no longer like, a big deal.
Yeah.
With authority that was actually recognized to, hey, church, just stay in your corner and we'll grant you tax-free status as long as you stay in your lane.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting too, Dan, because I think about some of these early topics that we've discussed in the season, how they've impacted people. I think one of the biggest encouragements I've seen is people are hungry for exactly that diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And then people are already kind of in the place where they're saying, yeah, that is a problem. Nobody's talking about this. It hasn't been addressed by the church. Obviously, it's sort of like, Big Pharma is not the one that's probably going to break the case on how Big Pharma is corrupt.
Right.
Well, you could say the same about Big Eva. But I've just been encouraged to see that there are people who want off that train. There are people who are seeking to build churches differently. I know we're going to talk more about that, but I just thought as we were talking about this, it's been really cool to see kind of an eye-opening among a lot of the church on these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Even just thinking about some of the, I think one resonating issue as well is theological minimalism.
Yeah.
Thinking about the way that, in many ways, I think early in our podcast, what we were just doing is describing much of our own experience and kind of saying, like, anybody else see this? Anybody else go through this before? For me, a couple of years ago, that theological minimalism light bulb was so big to being able to understand and diagnose, like, where have we gone wrong over the past centuries, and especially in an accelerated way in the last century, and how did we get there? And once you give it that name of theological minimalism, where we're just trying to boil down the faith into the fewest number of things you must do or believe to be a Christian, let's make it as easy as possible, kind of following or answering the problem of, well, we're seeing apostasy, we're seeing people leave the faith, we're seeing the decline of Christianity maybe in some regions or denominations in some areas. So let's respond by, how can we make it as easy as possible for somebody to come in and be a Christian, quote unquote. Well, just all you have to do, pray this prayer. That's it. Just come to this thing, pray this prayer, you're in. Just believe in these few doctrines, justification by grace, the inerrancy of Scripture, and we'll kind of shrink down the walls until we're just surrounding this inner keep of the castle. We've been pushed back and pushed back. Mm-hmm. So we've ceded, the town square. We've ceded the outer walls. We've ceded the farms surrounding. We've ceded so much of Christian life from saying that there's anything particularly Christian about how to be a farmer, how to be in many different vocations or different places. And I think that theological minimalism has been one of the biggest, and I just described more than theological minimalism, but that's been such a root issue with how we've lost so much ground, is that literally we did it willingly.
Yeah. And it is really difficult to just pigeonhole one issue because they're all connected. They all build on one another. You don't get, cultural syncretism without theological minimalism, without denying the church's authority, without, this, desire for fame and to grow fast. And like, they're all just build on one another, almost like a wave. And I like your analogy of like the church is essentially relegated to the keep. Like it's to the inner walls.
And it comes back to revivalism and decisionism there. Well, we've mistaken the door for the whole thing in some ways. Like we've mistaken repentance and conversion, that initial kind of like call to repent and believe the gospel, with sometimes the whole thing. So revivalism, decisionism, theological minimalism are all in bed together. Revivalism, and it ends up replacing rich, robust catechesis, both theological and cultural catechesis of how to be a Christian in every aspect of life, with emotionalism, with having emotional experiences of spirituality, which then infect the church service and the liturgy, converting the church service into an emotional production. Like you see how all of these things come together to create this absolute monster that just grows and grows and grows and consumes more and more of Christian culture. And so you look back over your shoulder and you realize that all of the areas of life and culture that used to be occupied by Christians who had fought for those areas and won them and built there have been abandoned, conquered and colonized by pagans and other gods, and we allowed them to do that. So Christendom 2.0 is going to be, we're going to talk about this more, but I mean, it's going to be a fight to go retake those.
Yeah. And so you've described that's like 90s church, early 2000s church, like an emotionalistic, convenient experience of a worship service. And so, Eric, what is the state of the church right now? Is that continuing, or are we seeing further developments in the church that have been worse?
Yeah, I think to a large extent it's continuing. There's a lot of normieism in America that hasn't changed, even with COVID. But I think that on the flip side of that, there are some people coming awake. We've often talked about how the last couple of years have been an apocalypse, an unveiling. And I think a lot of people, we've actually had followers of this show who are like megachurch guys who are like, whoa, I think you guys are right. They're starting to see some of the problems. I think what you run into is 1990s and 2000s church. This is the whole Aaron Wrenn matrix thing, right? That was positive or neutral world Christianity. You're engaging with a world that is thinking positively about Christians and what they do. Well, we're full center of negative world now. And I think once you get there, there's trials, there's persecution, the cultural war, and the conflict starts heating up. The boomer megachurch Christianity, lamestream Christianity, it's not going to make it. And I think a lot of people are recognizing that. Like, if you were going to a church the last 2 years and your pastor closed and was shaming you for not getting vaxxed and staying masked, you realize, like, this guy he's got my back, but he's got my back with a knife. I mean, we got to find somewhere else. I think there were a lot of people figuring that out. And this is also why I think a lot of people like J.D. Greear had all these sermons where they were like, shame on you, conservative Christians, for flocking away from our churches. No, good for them. They had every right to leave. They should have left a long time ago.
You told them to leave.
You told them to leave. You shamed them for their existence. Yeah. So now I think you're seeing something interesting happen. The conversation is kind of shifting, but I think ultimately this is about what's going on in the church, right? We're attacking Doug Wilson. We're attacking Christian nationalism. Why? Because Doug was one of the guys moving the ball forward. Mm-hmm. So I think you'll continue to see that happen. You're always going to have a large percentage of normies, but I think in my lifetime, this is the most I've ever seen people with their eyes wide open.
Do you think, guys, that the young, restless, and reformed world, and I mean peak young, restless, and reformed, which is like, 2010 to 2013, do you think that was something really positive? Was that just one more flavor of Big Eva, Big Fast Famous? What is that? How does that relate to this discussion? I know we all lived it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it still is too soon to say, but just as an instinct, I think that it's probably going to be viewed as a net positive.
Okay.
Even though the fallout from it, even say like 80% of the men,
The fuzz, yeah.
are maybe apostate or,
There's a lot of
it's
chaff.
bad. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a lot of chaff. That's why I say it's still too early.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be integral in the continued Reformation. Like Eric's talking about, I think a Reformation, like we're on the cusp. The early days of a Reformation. And in part, it's because of what you said, like the schism that's happening in churches. And so you do have churches that are like, the experience, the emotional experience, felt needs, kind of mega churchy. But the problem is now they have lady pastors. They've got gays in their worship service. Like they're continuing to go down that path, just like the world, careening off the cliff. And then you have churches that are going, whoa, hold on, wait a minute. Back up the bus. Like, we can't keep going this direction.
Where do we go wrong?
Yeah,
Let's go
and
back
so
there.
I think what'll happen is, as we look back through time, we'll see the young, restless, and reform movement as the movement back towards confessional Christianity and conservatism and appreciation of our spiritual forefathers, the reformers, even if most of those men were terrible. So I don't know if you guys agree with me on that.
Yeah.
Or if you disagree.
I think there's been, you're right, there's been a huge push for going back to traditionalism, confessionalism. I think one of the things that I noticed early on was like you'd read somebody like John Piper or listen to him preach, and he'd be a gateway drug, to Jonathan Edwards, John Owen, people like that. We start reading them and you're like, wait a minute. And this is one of those realizations that I've had over the years where you're like, I appreciate and respected John Piper for so many things, but like his political theology is not one of them. It's horrible.
Right, yeah.
But then I go back and read the guys that he said we should be reading, and I'm like, wait a minute. Samuel Rutherford was a based king. Like, this dude knew his political theology, was really working through these ideas, and influenced guys like Patrick Henry, which we read in the opening, right? These guys had actually worked through it. So I think a lot of people are like, listen, everything that we've experienced is so shallow. We're getting a taste of the old things. And I think fundamentally, I go back to something Martin Lloyd-Jones said in his book, Revival and Revivalism. I think is it revivalism, something like that.
I think it's revival and revivalism.
I think that's right. But he said, listen, fundamentally, Reformation is always about going and redigging the wells of Abraham.
Yeah.
It's going back to the old things and finding the old things out again in a fresh, new way that's being applied. That's the crazy thing to me about Doug Wilson. People have said, Doug is such a pariah. He's such a problem. Doug is not doing anything new.
Yeah.
He's just pointing back to B.B. Warfield and post-mill theology and guys upstream from him. So I think ultimately you're going to see more and more people in that vein. But I also think something else interesting is happening. The power before was consolidated in things like the Gospel Coalition and these huge mega churches and personalities. Now you're kind of finding a Gideon thing happening where God is consolidating influence, power in the right kind of way in really small, dispersed camps, right? I think a lot of people probably even get the wrong idea about us. They're like, oh, they must have like a 10,000 person church. And
do we not?
Yeah. And, there's like this perception.
Praise
but
God, no, by the way.
Oh, man.
That would
We don't
be
have enough.
a lot of work.
We don't have enough elders for that. And also,
we're going to need like
I'm going to go on
few
record.
100 more elders.
I'm going to go on record and say if we had 10,000 people in one church, we've failed.
we failed.
And I mean that because why didn't you start an enormous presbytery? Like, why didn't you have 50 churches at that point? But
you see what I mean? I think God is doing something to push away from the celebrity culture. And I think we're seeing a lot of rise of guys who are just faithfully pastoring and, out kicking their punt coverage with media ministries and being courageous men. I think you'll see, hopefully, God willing, we'll see more of that.
Yeah. For the project of this season to be successful, the project of seeing a new Christendom built, there will need to be thousands and thousands of Christian men and women who are equipped to stand for the truth of Scripture against the errors of both the liberal church and the pagan culture. This is one reason we're so glad to be partnering with our sponsor for this season, Reformation Heritage Books. Reformation Heritage Books offers a large selection of helpful and theologically rigorous resources on everything from biblical theology to history to blue-collar family discipleship the type of library and resources that could make the kind of men and women I just described, grounded in the rich heritage of the Reformed faith. We'd like to highlight one resource in particular, their Family Worship Bible Guide, that presents rich devotional thoughts on all 1,189 chapters of the Bible, including searching questions to promote conversation and to help you in leading your family in such a way as to say with Joshua, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Tap the link in the description of this episode to pick one up today. Something that's really interesting about Young, Restless, and Reformed is where it landed really does remind me of some of the things that got the Reformation going, because the Reformation we're coming towards the time when the printing press began to mean something. Because it really took 100 or 200 years after the printing press before it became a technology that was ubiquitous, like where you could it was normal to go and see materials printed on a press. That stuff got through culture. Well, technological innovation has really increased the rate of adoption. It's easier to disperse new technologies over these large supply chains and grids that we have now today. But think about where the Young, Restless, and Reformed came in terms of the internet. I mean, we'd had the internet for just a minute.
Driscoll was like one of the first guys to utilize.
Yeah. The internet, in terms of a usable technology to disseminate information quickly, in a high-quality way, in a way that began to displace older forms of media, really that was right when Driscoll's coming out. I mean, their website, they were the first, they were one of the first, it was still on the cusp where a lot of churches are still using tapes to distribute their sermons and things like that. And so in some ways, to me, Young, Restless, and Reformed because it grew up in the vernacular playbook of Big, Fast, and Famous, it took a lot of that and it updated it and branded it through new technologies. So it did take a lot of the Big, Fast. There was a ton of Big, Fast, and Famous in the DNA
Calvinistic
of the thing.
Big, Fast, Famous.
But then what they did though is they touched this. It was almost like they touched the spark to this great big long fuse that reached back 500 years and earlier. And I don't even know if they knew what they were doing when they touched the spark to that fuse. And so it started like a lot of people, it started with them just going, yeah, I'm a Calvinist plus all the big Eva stuff, and there's no contradiction in that whatsoever. But what it did was, with all the frothing of the apostasy and liberalizing and people who were just there for the branding and the music or the popularity and the fast and the celebrityism or whatever, they were just there for Matt Chandler and Mark Driscoll and all that, conferences, John Piper. But a good number of people really did keep following that back and kept going down this burning of this fuse that took them back to this great nuclear bomb of theology and this whole cultural vision of its cathedrals and that whole world of the Reformation. And the Reformation itself takes you all the way back through the Church Fathers and through just this rich, meaty legacy of Christian history. And so I do think that we might see out of Young, Restless, and Reformed. Young, Restless, and Reformed may have started as another flavor of Big, Fast, and Famous, but I think that the technological moment plus that connection back could lead it to being like you're saying, Dan, the first gasp or the last gasp of Big, Fast, and Famous going into a new reformational sort of season by recovery.
Do you think that we are headed into a reformation?
I think that inevitably we're headed towards massive change, either into huge turmoil, just culturally, I don't mean in the church, either in the form of huge turmoil and reinvention and some kind of reformation out of that, or maybe not as huge turmoil, but increased kind of balkanization. Like you're describing, Eric, a little bit, like these camps, these small decentralized things. The theology of like a Doug Wilson, reformational theology plus really strong postmillennialism plus all of Christ for all of life, this idea of Christianity for every part of life. I think that I'm mixing my metaphors at this point, but I think that's like this big fire there in Moscow that's putting off sparks that have started fires in other places around the country. I think that's going to keep happening, and that will lead to more and more balkanization, where bad churches are going to lose good people, and those good people are going to find people are listening to this show and they're in Big Fast and Famous, Big Eva type stuff. They're going to keep relocating and starting things, and that's going to grow up into this really, I think, strong sort of reformational culture that I think will win ultimately over the shallowness of the competition. So, I mean, in some ways, I'm kind of still figuring this out myself, what I think is going to happen. There's so many variables, but the other option could be that it just keeps going, that this is still for a long time, maybe just a small percentage. Maybe we see Big Fast and Famous in the form of like Bethel and these compromising churches that are now having lady pastors and that. Maybe they continue to be culturally dominant for a good time. In some ways, maybe they integrate with LGBTQ successfully. I just don't see it. I think the story that's played out over and over in history is that when churches do that, they die. So I'm hoping that first scenario plays out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say I've been actually hopeful about it. I know a lot of people have been like, there's fault lines now, and there's a lot of turmoil and chaos and conflict, and I'm a little bit demented in this way, to semi-quote Alex Jones. But I've actually seen the conflict as a good thing. Really what I've noticed is that, again, like the OOs, the teens of the 21st century, I was pretty dejected because it was like, yeah, you read Rushdoony and Doug Wilson, but Christians were really not awake to what was going on.
Uh-huh.
The last couple of years, people that I thought would never get off the fence got off the fence.
Mm.
And so that's why I think there's opportunity. I tend to think that the conflict is just starting, though.
Mm-hmm.
I think that usually what the Lord does is you have these intense periods of trial and suffering of some sort. He uses them to refine the church. They're not short. I think that, even if later reformational type work, maybe offshoot of Reformation was like the Puritans. Well, yeah, Puritan America came about, Patrick Henry's America came about, and the men that were produced were because there were pastors going to jail for preaching as nonconformists in England.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, all this faithfulness and persecution led to a plant, being planted and fruit in America later.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably what we'll see. I think there's probably going to be intensity of conflict.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, and I mean, this is generational work. So even if we don't see this reformation, like a big wholesale reformation, happen in our lifetimes, it wouldn't actually be a surprise. But I do think that we're just on the cusp. Like there is a wave rising at the moment because you are starting to see this from churches. There are a few churches. I don't think there are very many churches that are actually faithful churches to the rootedness of Christianity. I think that there are lots of churches that preach the gospel, and there are Christians in those churches. I'm not saying that all of them are apostate unless they look like us or some such nonsense. But I think you're getting a lot of churches that are becoming awake to the reality that the Christianity they've been discipled in is completely foreign to historic Christianity and to the scriptures. And so I think we are on the cusp of that. And a lot of it, I think, is because of Doug Wilson and because of the work that he's done to show, like, here's 4 generations worth of work.
The other thing I'll say,
and fruit.
Just in terms of Big Eva and the status there, is we've seen, and this is a blessing from God, we've seen men being exposed and women. Beth Moore, 5 years ago, she was still hiding in the fold, pretending to be a Christian. Now she's like, no, you don't really have to listen to the words of Paul. I'm sorry, at that point, you're a false teacher and a heretic, openly. Russell Moore, David French, these guys were kind of like hiding. Russell Moore was at Southern Seminary, and then he was at the ERLC with the SBC, but now he's outed himself.
Yeah, and that was what I had in mind when I read Jude.
Yeah,
that these people are actually hiding in your midst.
Yeah,
and there's stains on your communion service. I mean,
yeah. So I think that's been a big blessing. Just that these guys have been exposed. They're basically political operatives. The Davos video that came out last week. Rick Warren at this giant World Health Organization event in 2008, talking about how the church can be weaponized during a pandemic to lead the people in whatever the state wants them to do. Basically Rick Warren was laying the groundwork for what would happen in the shamdemic. We know from Megan Basham's reporting that is, in fact, Rick Warren was, intimately involved with the dissemination of, propaganda from Francis Collins and Fauci and those guys. So, again, I think that's all really positive. I'm really encouraged to see a lot of people standing up to that, saying, hey, we have problems here, and, we know who to stay away from because they're, they're political operatives, really.
Yeah, so I think we've got a good lay of the land, like where we are, where did we come from, where are we now? And my hope is that next we would lay out some principles.
Yeah.
Some principles like these are hills to die on. Because here's the thing. So many of us in this like bastard culture, that Doug Wilson calls, father hunger.
Yeah.
And that Robert Bly and Iron John talks about. Is this fatherlessness is just an epidemic where sons don't know their father.
Yep.
Essentially. And meaning they don't have the vision. They don't have the patriarchal, like, hey, son, follow me. This is where our family is going. These are the values of our family. This is the virtue that our family embodies. This is what you will do. This is who you are. And so a lot of us in many ways are bastards to that. We don't have the vision for the future and for our generations. And so what I'm hoping to do is through some of this and our continued work is to really give a vision. Similar to like in the movie Braveheart, William Wallace, he goes into battle and he's going to pick this fight, right? You've got the armies of Scotland and the armies of England that are assembled, and the lords are going to go negotiate so they get some more wealth and some more lands. And William Wallace gives this really stirring speech, right, where he's like, hey, we need to go fight for our freedom. We need to go and we need to fight. And the people are like, no, yeah, but we're going to die. If we retreat, we'll live. And he's like, yeah, you may live, but you would give everything you had on your deathbed with your family gathered around you to go back to today, to go back to right now and to fight for your freedom. And he wins the hearts of these men. And what he did is he said, here's the target. Here is what you are for. You're for freedom. And here's the battle, and come and follow me. So what I'm hoping to do is kind of paint a picture of like, where should we go? What are the principles? What is the freedom essentially in this case, the hill that we should die on, and then all start going towards the work of building, which would be the thing after that. So
yeah. So Dan, the other thing I was thinking about this morning, I don't know if this qualifies as a principle. We're sort of talking about the build, fight, win, and as we've thought about the King's Hall, right, we're saying we don't want to be the kind of guys that just sit in a room and talk about these things, and intellectually we're stimulated and we say, oh, great conversation, and then we go out and people go, yeah, but you're not doing any of that.
Yeah.
So I think that's like one of the instincts we've had in this is.
Yeah, and we'll show our work at the end of this.
Yeah,
because we do have things we're working on.
That's right,
absolutely.
And that is one of the principles I wrote down preparing for this episode was just what you're talking about, Eric. That principle floating in the air, disconnected from theological musing, isn't enough. That we need applied theology. The new Christendom won't be built without masses of everyday blue collar Christians just doing their work Christianly.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing as like the instinct of the drunk guy in the pub, right? Who is really upset about something and he froths about it, and he gets done venting his anger, and he's had a few drinks, and then he settles down and he's like, well, I feel better, and then he goes home and sleeps it off, but having accomplished absolutely nothing whatsoever. So that's not what we were trying to do.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, Brian alluded to this, mentioned it, is this is one of the things I love about Blue Collar America, is if you convince them of principles. Men have said to us, to me and to us, if that's true, what do I need to go do? And so that's the instinct we're trying to create in ourselves and in other people.
Yeah, we need as well, I think, even guiding that. This is another principle that has shot through really everything we've done here in season 1, and that's to build the new Christendom. You have to understand the totalizing nature of the Christian faith, meaning that you have to understand that Christ has something to say about every part of what it means to be human. We're not just aiming to build theological eggheads. We're not even just trying to do doctrinal retrieval from times past. Sure, let's understand the mysteries and the glories of the church fathers and the Reformation, and let's tap into that root. Let's do the work of retrieval theologically. Let's make sure that we're rooted to the church organically and deeply. But you have to understand that Christianity is a totalizing faith. It makes demands on your whole person. Present your bodies as living sacrifices to God. This is your spiritual worship. So when we say Christendom, some people think we mean like ecclesiastical-dom. Like we mean just church, big church, like church everything. No, we mean being Christians in every aspect of human civilization, human society, and human life. And so if we're going to do this thing, it means that, man, we've got to figure out how to do vocation and money Christianly. And is there a way to do that? The answer is yes.
It's also interesting to point out, I think a lot of people, when they hear us say that, they think, oh, so you want the church sphere to swallow everything.
Yeah, and you're like, no.
No. We want everything to be brought under the rule and reign of Christ.
Yeah, so just the default worldview of the business owner when they're doing business is that of a Christian.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody is making political or like legislating, they're legislating from a biblical worldview. When somebody is raising their kids, when somebody is going to the grocery store, when a guy is building a bridge, they're all doing it like Christians because there is a Christian way to do those things.
Yeah.
And so that's what we mean is like every person's default worldview is going to be that of Christianity because they believe the gospel and they've bent the knee to Jesus and they have faith that is living faith.
Another way we could say this is that we're aiming to disciple the nations.
Well, hold on, but I mean,
Yes,
I've read that it literally doesn't say
sorry,
disciple
Tom Hicks.
the nations.
It literally does, though.
Well, you can't even baptize a nation.
Sorry, Tom Hicks. Yeah,
Israel and the
you
Red
can't.
Sea.
I mean, you can. You also can in a very.
That was old covenant.
You know,
though.
you can't, but in a very real sense, actually, yes, you can.
Actually, yes, you
But
can.
also, nobody is so puerile as to think that when the scriptures say teach the nations, that it literally means like we're going to sit Argentina down as some kind of political entity and disciple it. It's like, of course we mean disciple Argentinians, but they're still Argentinians that make up Argentina. So we're still going to teach Argentina to be Christian. So, when we're talking about this, a lot of what we're saying is just kind of going back to some of the pre-modernist ways that we've been brainwashed into thinking about things like nations and people and cultures, and we just think in this great big homogenous lump. We just think in this like global American empire sort of way. And it's like, well, if the new Christendom is not just going to be baptized global American empire, the gay, it's going to be baptized nations. It's going to be altogether different, build different presuppositions about how we do everything. So that's a big principle. I think as I was thinking about how could we boil down the principles of the whole season, to me, that's one of the most foundational stones on the bottom of this cathedral is that we're talking about Christianity as a totalizing faith.
Yes. And the crazy thing is you even have folks in the Reformed world and elsewhere that are trying to fight very hard to relegate Christianity to its own corner.
Yeah.
Like get in your own corner.
Yeah.
The church, that's where they belong.
Not going to make it.
Not going to make it. So we also talked about, so related to that, we're not interested in just disconnected theological musing. These things need to be attached to doing. And another big principle that comes to mind for me is that, and it's really an outworking of those previous two, this totalizing faith is not just ethereal principles. It needs to hit the real world through application in every part of what it means to be human. But then how does that happen? Well, we need to build from the local on out and aim to make big decentralized networks and institutions that are really hard to kill. So local on out, from your feet to your family, to your local church, to your local economic community, your neighbors, your county, to your state, thinking that way, and then also thinking not in terms of like, can we make one big thing with one big guy in charge that he'll lead the thing, and then if he goes down or he compromises or these 3 or 4 people at the top compromise, the rest of us are just in trouble.
Yeah, and this has been like really one of the downfalls of conservatism in general. Like guys are like, okay, if we want to change the culture, we need something family, something research, family, something big 501c3.
Mm-hmm.
We need to throw like billions of dollars at it. We'll have these really vanilla conservatism issues, and we'll preach on those things, and we just need a lot of like institutional power. And it's completely wrong.
One of the things that inevitably does is it inevitably pushes you towards lowest common denominator.
Yes.
Because you're trying to make sort of across this huge, vast sea of people and across huge geography and all these other different things, you're trying to say, like, let's make one similar looking thing. And it's like, I actually don't want to see that happen. I don't want to see, like, our church, even if we wildly succeed and see a cathedral built here in Ogden, when we say that, guys, by the way, we're literally not kidding. We actually do want to build a cathedral. People were mad at me on Twitter the other day for saying that. I'm like, no, you don't understand. You're not going to make it. We want to build a cathedral, like out of rocks. Okay. So, but even then, like, I would want to see communities in every county of America that were in a self-contained way, in a sense. I know we're all the body of Christ, but I mean, like, they're economically, socially, and they're familially, in the churches, all ecclesiastically, politically, they're building something that's going to be like their flavor, their region, their people, their place. It's also following these big totalizing Christian principles, and I think that's where we get the beauty and the anti-fragility, to steal noted loser Nassim Talib's word.
Well, and that's the interesting thing is, you go back to Reformational work, John Knox. Kind of the fundamental thing that gets missed in that Reformation work was you had the English who were saying top-down rule. That's how we transform society. This is how we structure hierarchy and all those things, top-down. The elites are the important people. Everybody else doesn't matter. And the Presbyterians and John Knox fundamentally said it's from the bottom up.
Yeah.
We're going to start with men, and we're going to start with marriages, and then we're going to start with households, and then we're going to transform a society from the bottom. And I think that is fundamentally, that's God's order. You look at the way rule happens with Moses. Because you ruled a family well, then you can rule a larger entity, etc. That's how society should be structured.
Really, and that's how you disciple the nations, is in the same way.
Yeah.
So it's not any different.
Christendom Bible College offers a one-year certificate in the humanities for students who intend to pursue a degree, or for students who prefer to begin their chosen occupations upon completion of our program. Older students who never attended college, or who went to a college where the humanities were less robust, will also find our program stimulating and suitable. Located steps from the Ohio River in the town of New Richmond, we're unaccredited in order to remain free to teach as our biblically minded consciences demand. As servants of Christ, we won't wear the yoke of the woke. Instead, we stand on the shoulders of Christianity's giants, not to stew in nostalgia, but to see through the culture war's fog to the glorious days of a Christendom still to be built. Our exceptional faculty are committed to the historic, biblical foundations of our faith. Come be a part of Christendom Bible College. Visit us on the web at christendombiblecollege.org to learn more. While there, be sure to sign up for our email updates and receive your free 3-chapter excerpt of our very own Dr. Frank J. Smith's new book, Race, Church, and Society.
The next principle is that we need to stop aiming for fast growth and start aiming for deep roots.
Yep.
So Brian wrote this principle. What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean that a lot of the big, fast, and famous stuff, to reiterate, is just like a weed. Weeds do grow fast, but they don't bear good fruit. And when you're
for long,
for long.
Yeah.
When you're diagnosing problems in doing postmortems on failed movements and looking at failed culture that's producing failure, one of the things that just shoots through all of it is that it's all aiming for big, fast, famous. And the answer to that isn't for us to all come up with our own big, fast, famous. It's to aim for this plodding, basically,
Big Fast Famous has never actually been tried.
Yeah, right. The correct version. That's right. No, it's like, what I mean is that there are some basic compromises on the level of Christian doctrine you have to embrace Big Fast Famous. Things like robust church discipline is one of them. These things are the immune system of the church that are continually preaching people out of the church and out of the community if they will not be Christians, if they will not obey the Lord. We don't want them, even if they have a lot of money, even if they'll give us a lot of influence, whatever it is, whatever carrot is dangled. So I think when we say deep-rootedness, a lot of what we're saying is, let's stop giving way and getting rid of these really important tools that the Lord has given to prevent fast growth, like look at the methods he used. Hey, don't follow me, because if you do, you're going to be, I don't have a place to lay my head. Do you want to be like me? You're going to suffer too. Like Jesus was continually trying to talk people out of this. And so I think that, as we just take up, again, not reinventing, this isn't new stuff, we just do the old things, we'll see the growth slowed, but it will be oak tree growth.
Well, and part of it is like generational thinking as well, right? Mm-hmm. Covenant succession, like we've been talking about, because you can't have deep roots if you don't start thinking past 5 minutes from now.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to have old men who will plant trees, the fruit of which they'll never eat.
Yes.
And I mean, we were talking about this recently, going to one of our churchmen's house, and they've got these amazing fruit trees in the backyard that their grandpa or great-grandpa had planted, spliced together. Well, now they get to enjoy the fruit of it. We have to be thinking like that in the church. And generally what that means is when you go to build something that's going to last, legacy building, it's going to be a lot more difficult in the beginning, right? It's not just throwing up, sticks and drywall and saying
it's difficult, costly.
Yeah, it's expensive. Building with stone is a very expensive work.
Yeah.
It's going to be a lot slower.
Do we have a lot of money, by the way, to do that? To do towards the cathedral fund?
Do you mean the royal we? Like, do you have a lot of money?
Listen,
that answer I do know, and it's
God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, Dan.
Yeah, he does.
That's right.
So do we have a lot of resources?
Yes.
In a way.
In a sense. I think so. We want to kind of skip over these. We don't want to go too slow because we've talked about a lot of this. The next one, I think, related to this, because, again, fighting that weed-like growth is just having the courage to do church discipline and fight the right fights, not be compromised. Is we need to encourage, big principle of this season, we need to encourage the will to fight without giving way to the schismatic or the bitter brawler who makes everyone his enemy. Basically know which hills to die on, that faithful versus careful men distinction. But we do need to cultivate the will to fight the right way if we're going to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to know which principles you're going to die on. What are the hills you're going to die on? And in my example, obviously, William Wallace thought freedom was pretty important. Seems like old Pat Henry thought freedom was pretty important as well. So give me liberty or give me death. So we can't make every issue, though, hey, what exclusive psalmody or give me death. A lot of these issues, people just don't seem to get along.
The schismatic, the bitter brawler.
Yeah, absolutely. Not that the EP guys are like overly schismatic. It was just the first thing that came to my mind.
Sure. Yeah. I get what you're saying. You're looking at a principle that's a very, to people who are EP, like it's a very important part of the worship. So I'm
glad that they're convinced.
I'm like, but Psalms are a hill I would die on, whether they're in our worship in a major feature or not. So a lot of overlap there, but yeah, we don't need to. My goal isn't to look at my EP brothers and fight them to death about using uninspired hymns, right? And they're not on a different team from me because they are EP, right?
Yeah, if I went to their worship service, I'd just look side eye at them a little bit and sing the Psalms.
I'd
and
be
happy,
super loud, it'd be based. I'd love it. It's like you do see these guys though that as you encourage the will to fight, one of the people you end up having to fight are the people who are like, "Oh, fighting is all there is." Isn't that funny?
That is funny.
Like you have to. You always end up like doing where on one hand you're like, hey, quit compromising, quit being gay, like stop. Yeah. No lady pastors. This is stupid. Like that's all the stuff that government education, like that's all the stuff that made us lose. And then on the other hand, you're like, calm down, bro, over there. Like we can be friends. Like just if all of us don't share identical thoughts about Al Mohler, it doesn't mean that we need to kill each other or like, we don't need to break a broom in the middle, throw it on the ground and say fight to the death and the winner, It's like you always end up doing both.
Is that an option?
Is that an option?
Yeah.
There's actually just one simple test. If you base your theology on Ayn Randian thought or not, and then you're either good or you're out.
Eric will fight you to the death.
I actually will.
Actually, I just spent a weekend with an Ayn Randian objectivist who is an atheist. And then on my other side, there was an Eastern Orthodox, really based, honestly, older gentleman who had converted out of that to Christianity.
Wow.
So there you go.
There you go.
Eric's just subtweeting left and right in this episode like hard.
Oh, man.
Also, I will fight you. No, I'm just kidding. Maybe.
All right. So the next principle is that the fear of the Lord must be foundational in everything. Because if you fear the Lord, you cannot be bought or buyable.
You can't be bought.
And you are not buyable.
And there
you are
can't be
not for sale, sir.
There can't be a
but you
price.
are, in fact, are principled.
You can't be like, hey,
I
bro,
didn't write that clearly.
You can't be like, hey, I'm not bought, but it's just because no one's reached the reserve limit on the bid.
I see.
On the bid. That's all I meant. I'm sorry, Dan. That was confusing.
No. That's great.
I saw it coming. I was like, he's phrasing the sentence in a way he's about to run into a grammatical brick wall. And it won't work anymore. But yeah, anyway, you got to be principled, not grift.
Yeah,
grift is gay.
The man who fears the Lord is unbuyable.
Yeah, and we're not going to build a cathedral if George Soros comes and says, "I'll give you $100 million for your cathedral." We'd say no.
I was going to say
I might rob him in the parking lot, but oh, just kidding.
All right, Eric. Sorry. Keep going.
There's a proverb about that, by the way.
There is. Serious.
Literally, like verbatim.
Eric has like a serious point
like
over there. We're talking about robbing George Soros in a parking lot, but keep going.
Yeah, the simple way to ask yourself, like, am I a principled guy? Can I be bought? The question is, have I ever turned people down? Have I ever said no?
Yeah.
Somebody says, I'll give you 50, 100, 200 grand, 500 grand, and you say, on principle, I just can't do that.
Yeah.
There's some jobs, like, you think about the work that we do where somebody could pay you an exorbitant amount of money and you'd say no to it. Mm-hmm. You're like, no, it would take me away from what I am called to do.
Yep.
This happens in churches all the time, by the way.
Yeah.
Is you'll get somebody coming in and they are going to give you a big donation, but there are strings attached.
Yeah.
And if you take those strings, you've just been bought.
That's right.
I mean, there's probably like a reasonable, hey, I'm going to give this money to your school. I would just really like it to go towards books or whatever.
No, you're
that's a different thing. It's really where you get some of these churches they become so indebted to a few persons that they have to show partiality, and then they've capitulated at that point. And so, even apart from institutions, men must be principled in the fear of the Lord.
Yes.
And not as people pleasers, but working heartily to the Lord, and that they cannot capitulate to the first shiny object that's placed in front of their face to capitulate on their principles.
Yes, sir. You can be bought in more than one way, not just with money, with influence, with platform, with in group preference, with join this in a ring. There's a million ways, and the only answer to all of them isn't to figure out a different strategy to defend yourself from all the possible ways you could give in. It's to fear the Lord.
Absolutely. Okay, so the next principle is that worship is a big deal.
Yes.
And you must get it right. Why is worship a big deal?
I mean, you could answer this in a number of ways. I think first and foremost, because it's the first commandment. And so anything that's first is going to be important. Come on, Dan.
Boom.
Boom.
Why is this number 7?
I wasn't arguing with you. I just
I know. Just
Why did I make this number 7?
But I think especially when we're talking about culture war, understanding that worship is the center of the cultus, that your worship is going to shape everything about you, your people, your family, your community, your business. Worship is central to all of life. We're created as worshiping beings. 2 Corinthians 4, we're going to become like the things that we worship. And so if we're sitting here saying like, hey, we want to fight a culture war, I mean, the most obvious question that most conservatives never get around to asking is, well, what culture are we defending?
Yeah.
What are we promoting? Are we promoting Dave Rubin? I'm not.
Yeah.
So which culture? It's going to be a reflection of ultimately what you worship.
Yeah.
I think worship is an act of cultivation.
Yes.
It's definitely, I mean, both cultivation share the same root in the Latin. And so you're cultivating people. You're communicating a lot by the way that you conduct your liturgy and the fruit that you're producing in your people through that liturgy, because you're telling them this is what God's like. This is how you worship and approach the holy and living God. And so if you cultivate a very shallow worship service with the barest minimum, of essentials, you're going to produce a people that emulate that.
Yeah, if you make it all about an emotional experience, a worship experience, your people are going to become like what they're worshiping, which is a God who dispenses emotional fuzzes and fizzes, right? On the complete other side of the spectrum, if you worship like the Orthodox Church, and you worship in this, like, I will be surrounded by my cloud of idols that I will venerate, and I'll make, or like a Roman Catholic. I mean, I drove by with my guy Ben Garrett this last week, Mary, Queen of Heaven Church, right? Roman Catholic Church. And if you worship in some of those ways as well, we're not just saying like high liturgical's better than gay, big, fast, and famous. We're saying, no, you got to get worship right. It's like if I look at the cultures that something like, in Eastern Orthodox cultures that have been dominated by that, I see cultures that look like the worship of idols in many ways.
Yeah.
And actually, Doug wrote a really good article. I wish I had recently read it so that I could say it as well as he did. He wrote a really good article on that where he was making a similar critique of Orthodox worship and the culture that it made, where you can go to a country that's been dominated by it and you're going to be like, come to this church, go down to the catacombs, and you'll be able to touch this mummified body of this old saint, and that will dispense this special grace to you, and you'll be able to touch them and ask this saint to pray for your cancer or whatever it is. And it was like, we need to get worship right, or we'll become idol worshipers somewhere. If you don't get the worship of God right in the center, it's not there'll be no worship. Some idol will get in, and you'll end up looking like that idol at the end of the day. So that's why when we say worship, it's like we're also talking about Reformed Catholicity, where, I'm not interested in fighting like, is it going to be exactly this kind of covenant renewal worship versus this Reformed liturgy versus like all the way out to the edges? It's like, no, but let's get the center right, and then let's be on the same team. But you can't just say the mistake a lot of guys make, which is we're going to get the culture fighting right, the blogging right, the business right, but we're going to do all those things while we don't have good church, where we're not worshiping with the saints in a way that's like the center. And you don't have a tribe there. You don't have this, you're not gathering with the saints properly. You're not, that really guts you, and it builds a hollow culture over the generation. So, this principle is absolutely, it could have been number one.
Okay, number 8, death to celebrityism. That is definitely a Brianism. Death to celebrity, but not death to courageous, extraordinary leaders, or death to hierarchy, rule, and authority. That was worded in a way that might be a little confusing. So essentially what you're saying is death to the celebrity, but not death to courageous, extraordinary leaders.
Yeah, death to celebrityism, even more importantly.
Celebrityism.
Death to the principle.
No, kill the celebrities.
Don't actually kill the celebrities, guys.
Oh, my goodness.
Death to celebrityism, not true, courageous, extraordinary authority. And those are different things. I think that's the difference between like what we've talked about.
Well, because the courageous man will be.
Yeah, people are going to follow your banner.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't say death to celebrityism. Nobody listen to me.
Right.
I'd be absolutely. God gave different parts. There is such thing in the body as a mouth, just like there is such thing as a hand.
But it is interesting, even when you read the Gospels, that John 7, I think, right before 37. When they say, come down to the city, they want to make you king. And Jesus is like, peace, I'm out.
I'm out.
And he literally just checks out and leaves and like, you guys can handle this one. I'm just, boop.
That is true.
Dunzo. So, I think we don't take those passages seriously, like where even some of the stuff that we've sought to build in our church, we have weeks where, Brian could be gone from service. And it's
Sunday.
not like, oh, man, we can't do church because Brian's not here.
Actually, it's usually pretty good.
He was going to say better.
I
watched the B sound form on his lips.
It was pretty
personally offended.
The base,
I was like,
either way.
It was based.
I was like,
it was actually the same.
Knife.
No,
it
actually it was the same.
Should be the same.
Yeah. And so what you'll find with courageous men, they will gain celebrity in some ways, similar, like in my example of William Wallace. The difference is the courageous leader leads from the front, and the celebrity leads from the back and gets the benefits, like the lords in this picture.
So what you're saying is we should figure out how to do whatever is popular and then capitalize?
I think being an opportunist is a sleazy thing to do, yes.
Interesting.
So I don't think I would do. Are you trying to start fights here?
Notes taken. No, I'm just taking notes,
Yeah? Okay.
I'm actually not.
He's
not
literally
taking
not
that. I'm
taking.
literally
He's
not.
literally not, though, at the same time. I think the principle here to get in your bones is that we're not, when we say death to big, fast, and famous, death to celebrityism, we're not saying that homogenizing and egalitarianism is the answer. That it's like, let's get rid of all the hierarchy. Let's get rid of all the authority. Let's get rid of all the influential leaders. Let's get rid of all of that. It's like, no, God made a world where there was Christ, there was his 3, James, Peter, and John. There were the 12. There were the 70. There were disciples outside of that. God made a world where there was regional and influential regional leadership in the early church. And, so one of the answers that we almost always want to reach for in our modern American discipleship is for egalitarianism. And that is a tempting thing to reach for when you're looking at this big, fast, and famous enemy that's like celebrities are leading us to worship themselves and then building cultures of death. And it's like, we want to say no to that. And we also want to say yes to godly qualified elders that absolutely you give deference in your life. You should be aiming to be a part of a local church where you're like, I will listen to what these men say. I will make changes in my life when they tell me to, because I respect them. And I believe that I was made to follow them and that God appointed them to lead in the church. It's going to have local implication in families, implication in broader culture. But I think that's another big principle that we've talked about through this season in establishing, like, we're telling men to go become authorities, to go become respectable, to go win glory. Like,
And the last principle, we're telling men to go be carnivore, Dan.
No, literally, we're not doing that.
I am failing at that.
That's Hard Men Podcast. If you're curious about that,
Yeah, they are doing an interesting series, guys. Go check it out.
Oh wow, thank you very much. Well, okay.
Ben and I hear about it all the time because
It's
smell
actually,
it.
when we get to work, they beg us to hear about carnivore.
We get here and we're like, not only
Wow,
do we
the
want
basement
to
of the church
smell,
still smells like beef.
I want my workplace to continually smell like cooking beef.
You smell like beef and cheese.
I want to work with people who smell like cooked
Definitely
beef.
do.
And then I want to hear about eating cooked beef and its health benefits. But
Final principle.
Yeah,
you have to have humor along the way.
it's true.
So here
Absolutely.
we are.
Laugh at yourself.
And laugh
Or
at Dan.
NGMI.
That wasn't on the notes. I don't find that to be humorous.
Laugh at yourself or
laugh at-
NGMI.
NGMI, Dan.
No, I'm gonna make it. I'm fine.
He's going to make it.
I'm gonna make it.
He's
It'll
going to
be
make
fine.
it.
All right, so we talked earlier about how our goal when doing the King's Hall was not to just essentially have a podcast to vent a little bit, complain about all the mega churches and how much money they have and stuff like that, but is actually to do something, because talk is cheap, right? Anybody can podcast, but it's what's happening behind the scenes that you guys probably don't know about. And so what I would like to do is talk about this big project that King's Hall is just a part of that we're going to be launching. Eric, would you like to introduce it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the project we've been working on for quite some time was really we were aiming at from the beginning, I think, is New Christendom Press. So we are launching that. We've got a website up, which Brian and Ben have been hard at work on. We've got a ton of things that you're going to be familiar with that fit under that umbrella, including the Hard Man podcast, including King's Hall, including Brian has some podcast or something with his wife.
Cold.
Bright
Hearth, which is actually one of the biggest ones on there.
I was going to say
Actually-
cold.
One of the.
He can't say it.
He can't say it.
He can't bring himself to say
Can't say
it.
it.
The Lady Podcast.
The Lady Podcast is
Lady-
the biggest one.
But dang it. But we have this huge stable of stuff we're doing. We're going to be putting on a conference, Lord willing, next year. Brian and I have got some books that we're working on. Dan, doing a little author book writing.
Yeah, well, it hasn't been approved yet, so we'll see.
Well, you can talk to me later. I'll approve it.
Oh, okay.
Maybe. Maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, we've got
Well,
more book projects than we've got time for. So
I guess
we've got
you're
enough
El
book projects.
Presidente, so
Yeah.
We've got
right.
enough book projects for some years.
So, Brian, we've got New Christendom Press. I guess if you would just tee us up a little bit more, what are some of the other things it's going to be doing?
Yeah.
Why is it so important to Like, why do we even need to do it, first of all?
Yeah, so New Christendom Press is a Christian publishing house with cathedral-sized aims. I mean, that's basically what we're trying to do.
That was so cheesy.
It's true. That's what we're trying to do.
No, I know it is. It just
Ray,
sounds
edit
super
that out
cheesy.
and replace what Dan said with something like, "Wow, that was awesome." But
Ray-
from someone
Ray's
else,
not
not
gonna
even
have
the
time
same
to do
voice.
that.
Not even the same voice.
Yeah.
I'm just
Dan
kidding.
saying, you're a
I'm
genius,
just kidding.
Brian.
No, that's what we're saying is that words are very important in building
They fuel
Christendom.
reformations.
Yes. Words go out and they take root in different places in different people's minds, and they kind of worm around and they get into their DNA. And you'll notice that when you listen to somebody for a long time, or you sound like the people that you were influenced by, and they shape literally how you live your life. So one of the things that we believe needs to exist are more Christian publishing houses with this particular theological and cultural vision for this totalizing view of the Christian faith coming out in everything that you do as a human being. So we're aiming to do everything from long-form books type of media to video. Obviously, we have a lot of podcasts, music. We're also looking to basically and put on a conference here in the year of our Lord 2023. We're aiming, Lord willing, to put on our first New Christendom Press conference here that we'd love for you to consider coming and joining us and being a part of. All of this, we have sort of a placeholder. It's got some info up at newchristendompress.com. And you can go over there and basically sign up to keep in touch with what we're doing, as well as hear some more about what we're building at New Christendom Press. And also, as we've said many times before, doing high-quality Christian media, doing high-quality media is extremely expensive, costly in terms of time and money. And so one of the big announcements that we have is that actually now Eric Kahn is working for us full-time at New Christendom Press, and then we have a mixture of other part-time folks that are here. And so we'd love to have you partner with us here. We've got lots of different ways that you can support the work at newchristendompress.com as well. But yeah, big project and in the works since before the King's Hall existed even.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the ways that you can partner with us, as Brian was talking about, we will have a donation button up on there. But also for guys who are looking to invest in something long-term, if you've got $10,000, $25, $50, $100, we want to partner with you.
Tax deductible.
Tax deductible, that's right. Thank you, Dan. So really we're seeking to do something that is, I think in a lot of people's minds, they may say, well, oh, I know you guys had a podcast or a couple podcasts. But this really goes back to that reformational work of really what fueled the Reformation was media, early media.
That's right.
And so we're seeking to do that as well, hoping and praying for cultural renewal and change and the building up of Christendom 2.0.
Yeah, including some tools for families and fathers to lead, their families in worship. Yeah, so we're looking to build more than just, some books and some podcasts, although those are going to be very, very core to what we do. And speaking of building, the other thing that we've done is we're partnering with Hardiman Company. And Hardiman, what they do is they're kingdom-minded, like they're taking dominion economically. Mm-hmm. So these men, based out of Texas, they buy small businesses, quite often from boomers that are retiring. They're retirement age. They don't have anybody to pass the business on to. And then what they do is they train men, Christian men, and they put them over this business, and then they keep the business. Yep. And so they're taking economic dominion Christianly by putting Christians in charge of these businesses. And so we've partnered with them. So we're going to be doing a lot more work with them in order to wage war on the economic sphere against the pagans. Because I guess you can't lay siege. I keep bringing that up, but you can't lay siege, but you can lay economic siege by being Christians and having the best, window and glass shop, or having the best auto body shop, or having the best whatever small business.
Yeah, and true freedom for Christian men is going to be economic as well as, you have to have a great church to go to, but you also have to be economically free working for Christian men to build up own space where you can operate on and build your kingdom on that.
We've talked a lot about ecclesial building. We've talked a lot about education. We've talked a lot about family, and we've talked about economic dominion. But this is one of those areas where we're really hoping to see the money put where the mouth is in ways that are massive and have potential to be absolutely game-changing in lots of cities and lots of places. So, yeah, we've been working hard building that as well.
What's the, at this point, Dan, if you would just kind of let people know, what's the call to action if people are interested in learning more about that, or perhaps getting involved, either an investor, small business owner, stuff like that? What can they do?
Yeah, I would go to hardmanco.com and take a look at their website, see what they do, take a look at the companies that they have right now. And the thing is, as far as investments, there's a project that we'll be working on that will be launched here soon that will allow you to not just donate money but to actually be an investor. But I'm not going to announce any of the details of that at the moment.
Okay. So if you're interested in that, just get in touch with us through one of our channels.
Yeah.
And there will be more information.
Yeah. If you want to see economic dominion taken, in towns that have good churches like Ogden, there's going to be opportunities there. So you can reach out to me or to one of the guys at, is it King's Hall at Proton?
It's the Mail? King's Hall at protonmail.com.
Yeah, and we can also provide links for that in the show notes.
I mean, our website.
Social media.
kingshall.org. It has all this stuff. There's links everywhere. You know how to get in touch with us, guys. We can never remember when we're going to actually say it out loud on an episode because we wrote it down and then we don't talk about it. So, yeah, get in touch with us. We'd love to get you on the list there. And in the meantime, we're now wrapping up season 1 of the King's Hall. This will be episode 35. I checked. Episode 35, going to be the last one here. And we'll be dark in the main feed for a few months now. We're going to be dark in the main feed until the beginning of 2023, so about January. In the meantime, you will hear us announcing the topic for season 2, what we're going to be going deep on, and hopefully taking the King's Hall and even to the next level in season 2 in terms of content, production, helpfulness to you practically, and also just giving you some great Christian media to essentially listen to and hope. We really hope to change lives. We really hope to help make men stronger men, to make Christian women stronger women, and to benefit you, build you up in Christ. But in the meantime, you can follow along with us. We're not going to be releasing no content in the King's Hall. We're just going to be releasing content on our Patreon for the next 2 months. So sign up, follow along there, and really you get 2 things. You support us, you help us actually pay our bills, continue making this show possible, and you also get access to a whole lot of material. At this point, it's a huge back catalog of Patreon exclusive episodes, most of which, the vast majority of which, will never see the light of day other than for folks who are supporting the show. There's lots of other rewards and things you can get. You can join our chat at certain levels where we have a group that we talk with lots of guys around the world, and man, it's the most based chat, I think, in North America.
Yes, it is. So if you're interested in hearing our Patreon exclusive episodes for the following weeks, support us on Patreon.
Yeah, support us there. There's a link in the description there. And that's going to be it. We're going to be dark until January. We're deep into production already for season 2. We look forward to sharing with you the topic of that season soon, and a little bit of a teaser promo sort of vibe coming up. But until then, remember, festina lente, make haste slowly. Don't build fast, build deep roots. And until then, God be with you. We'll see you next time in the King's Hall.